Every Easter Vigil, the Catholic Church welcomes new members, adult converts who are coming into the church, as opposed to babies whose Catholic families bring them to be baptized. This Easter, 2026, multiple parishes across the nation saw a surge in adults becoming Catholic. Some dioceses reported multi-year or even all-time records for people entering the church at Easter.
Religion seems to be having a moment, especially with young people. Protestant and non-denominational churches have also seen an influx of younger converts, including at a mass baptism at Pirates Cove in California, where nearly 30,000 people got baptized all at once.
According to a study from the Barna Group, which tracks data regarding the role of faith in culture in the United States, young adults, Gen Z and Millennials, have become the most regular churchgoers, outpacing older generations.
And it's not just in the United States. A piece from The Independent titled "Make Christianity Cool Again: Why Gen Z is Flocking to Church" states that although the percentage of people identifying as Christian in Great Britain has fallen to 39%, the church is in a period of rapid growth driven by young adults and, in particular, young men.
It's easy to get enthusiastic about what some are referring to as a religious revival. But it's one thing to attract young people to the church, quite another to offer them what they are looking for so they choose to stay and become part of a church community. What are young people looking for from the church? And is the church offering it to them? That's what we're going to discuss on this episode of Glad You Asked.
Welcome to Glad You Asked, where we answer the questions about Catholicism that are easy to ask, but not so easy to answer.
So, Emily, I have a lot of thoughts about this particular topic, and I'm really curious to hear what the experts on this have to say. There's just been almost like a kind of pop phenomenon, this conversation about everyone's becoming Catholic now, Christianity's cool again. And I have to say, I recoil against some of that discourse.
Yeah, I am someone who only very recently aged out of being kind of the official young adult demographic, right? And I have my own experiences of trying to join a church, trying to find a community, and it not being quite so easy as like the mass welcome that we're reading about, right? I think that despite the news stories, parishes are still struggling in real ways with what to do with young adults. I remember going to a new church and asking to meet with leadership and saying, like, how can I be involved? I really want to be involved. And they were like, oh, well, you're young. They were like, well, we have this young adult group for people ages 18 to 35, and you should go to that. And I did. And at the time I was in my late 20s, maybe. And there's a really big difference between someone who's 19 and someone who's in their late 20s, who's married and has a job that involves retirement account and health insurance, right? Like, there's just a really different, there are really different places in their life. And I think you can see this with parishes, like offering things like theology on tap. Like, that's really what young people want, right? Like, just to go to the bar and talk about theology. And I think there's so many examples of kind of young people trying to get pigeonholed into these places where they should fit in parish life, especially before they have families and kids.
It's funny because it just really highlights how geography shapes these things, because my experience of the Catholic Church in 4 different states has almost never been one in which I was pounced on and welcomed. And that includes when I was a young person, when I was the person they were supposed to be collecting, and I was enthusiastic about it. But looking back on that, I also remember a very different experience when I attended Protestant churches and everyone was like, welcome, welcome, we're going to gather you in. And it was kind of exciting. It was like, oh, they want me, finally. But then afterwards, it was just kind of like nothing. And as a nerdy kid, that was one of the reasons why I ended up preferring the Catholic Church, because I wanted to be engaged on an intellectual level. And there's this tendency to, like you mentioned, to just lump young people from multiple different ages. They have multiple experiences, multiple needs in life. And it's also a little weird when the older folks are being like, okay, well, this is what I liked when I was young, bars. Therefore, young people today must also like bars.
I also think, and this isn't universal for sure, but I do think that in many parishes and many faith communities, there's this, again, this like look back to how things worked a generation ago. Well, you want to know why young people are not volunteering their time? Because almost everyone I know has multiple jobs or has kids and can barely get to church on a Sunday anyway because their kids are in soccer practice or are not giving money because they literally don't have any money to spare. And so I think as long as we kind of continue this way of looking at what a successful church community is, that harkens back to this very old model of what a family looked like, how a family functioned, how a family showed up. We're never really, there's always going to be a bridge or a gap there between young people's actual experiences and the church.
Well, that's what we're going to talk about on this episode of Glad You Asked. I'm Rebecca Bratton Weiss, one of your hosts.
And I'm Emily Santa. Before we get into the interview, though, let's take a moment to thank our sponsors. Glad You Asked is sponsored by the Claretian Missionaries. The USA-Canada province of the Claretian Missionaries tends to the religious and pastoral needs of vulnerable communities. As part of a global congregation of Catholic priests and brothers, Claretians uplift the dignity of all people, especially those who feel overlooked or forgotten. To find out more and get involved, please visit www.claretians.org.
Now, back to today's topic. This episode of Glad You Asked is a little different from our usual format, since we've invited several guests to talk to us about what young people want from the church. These guests come from a variety of denominations and backgrounds and minister to people of all ages.
Catalina Morales, Drew Stever, and Baird Link are three of the contributors to a recent book, Hungry for Hope, Letters to the Church from Young Adults, edited by Jeremy Paul Myers and Christina Fruge, and published by Eerdmans.
According to the Eerdmans site, this is not a book about how to attract young adults back to church. Instead, it is an invitation to listen to young adults as they offer important insights regarding the capacity of the church and the world to flourish going forward. Thank you all so much for joining us on the podcast. Could each of you briefly introduce yourself and maybe say something a little bit about your background?
Yeah, my name's Drew Stever. I'm a pastor and chaplain located in Southern California.
Hello, my name is Catalina Morales, and I am located in Massachusetts, and I work in faith-based community organizing.
Hi, my name is Baird Linky. I'm a ELCA Lutheran pastor in Missoula, Montana area.
So I know that you all are from a wide range of backgrounds and denominations, but just like overall, do you feel that church leaders are doing a good job of listening to young people?
Oh boy.
No.
Yeah, that's what the book is for. Was kind of the intention of sharing some of that with church leaders as an invitation. There's a lot of ways I think that each of our chapters highlights some of the structural barriers to young people's voices being heard in church systems, and I think each of our chapters refers to that a little bit. But part of it is that I think young people are at a stage of their lives where they're less embedded in the way that institutions and structures function, and they're less dependent on those things continuing the way that they are. I think that's a real gift to the church as a whole to have people who are at a stage where disruption comes more naturally to them, and can be a huge gift to the institution if the institution is willing to listen to it. But the way that institutions function is, one is their mission and the other is the perpetuation of the institution, making sure that that structure continues. And so there's some automatic resistance then to folks who are coming in with the gift of disruption and a different way of seeing things.
Yeah, so I don't know if any of you have or examples of stories of times when you feel like there was that really missed opportunity to disrupt the church.
I have a story. So I'm a pastor at a church, and we had a group of students from a local college come and perform a portion of a play that they were doing, and it was about Leviticus and Jesus. And there was some profanity in that performance, and the response from the congregation was, well, these young people should know better. They just need more, they need more training. They need more support to better understand how to be in church. And my response was, what? What do you mean they should know better? Shouldn't it be the other way around where, thank you so much for feeling safe enough and brave enough to come into this space and to showcase this piece of work that you all have been working so hard on. How can we learn and be transformed by what you presented to us? Because it is bringing up some feelings in us. And maybe we should talk about that first before judging them for, gasp, swearing in church.
I didn't know that I was going to need my pearls for clutching today, Drew. That's harrowing, the story that you just told.
I think to that point, my experience, growing up in the church and then also just with young people in the church is a lot of times instead of trying to not only listen, but then do exactly what Drew just said, is we shut things down right away. It's like, oh, this is not good. This can't happen. Or we don't want to accept that, youth bring such unique voices into a space or institutions that have been around forever. And so I don't know if I would say like there's a moment to disrupt the church. I think it's always true that young people come up in the church. There's not anyone I haven't talked to that grew up in a church and says, there was a time I didn't feel listened to as a youth. Everyone I've talked to says that.
One of my favorite stories to tell is I went to this, it was like a social event dinner. My church would host dinners in people's houses and you would sign up and go. And my husband and I went, everyone else is in their 70s and 80s. And we show up and it was lovely. Like they're all retired college professors. They're all super smart. We had a great time. And then as the night goes on, my husband and I are sitting on one end of the table. Everyone else is on the other end of the table. And they go, so what's it like to be a young person? And we kind of laughed it off. But I was like, there's only so many times that you can be in that situation and feel like you belong.
I was at a retreat for young adults in the church that was pulling young people from around the country all together at this Bible camp in the kind of middle of nowhere, Georgia, which was really fun. And we had a bishop Zoom in to talk to the folks who were gathered there. And we had, I think it was about 50 to 60 young people gathered at this retreat who were all so excited to be in the room with people their age to talk about faith and the challenges that come with that. And this bishop asked, so what's different about y'all? Why aren't the rest of your peers like you? And that was a challenging question to be posed to us. I think it was coming from a place of trying to be complimentary or encouraging, maybe. But there was a piece of it that was like, there's hundreds of people who wish they could have been here who aren't, either for issues of cost or for logistics, whatever it is. And also the question of like what's right with us implies that there's something wrong with the folks who weren't in the room. And it gets really challenging as a young person, like you were just saying, Emily, to answer that question kind of generationally, where I wasn't elected king of young Christians. I can't answer for for all of our experiences or young people in general. And there's also a dynamic that I've noticed being the young person brought in to explain the youth at times, which isn't a job that I do anymore because it didn't seem to be useful. But people take that opportunity to start asking young people, like, what's wrong with my kids? Why aren't my children involved in the church anymore? What did I do wrong, or what's wrong with them? And that's a position that I can't be in. I'm not a therapist. I don't know their story. I don't know how to walk them through that grief or that resentment. And I want to be sympathetic. Like, I think that that's coming from a real place of genuine hurt and confusion. But if the feeling is, well, someone did something wrong, someone's at fault, rather than opening with curiosity about, what do you find beautiful about this? What are the things that are compelling you to be here? We're starting from an assumption that there was like a breakdown in supply chain, that there was something wrong with the manufacturing process of good Christians, rather than the reality of this is about relationship and the experience that people have with the church and the relationships that they build there. are going to be impactful in ways that are not conveniently packaged or easy to go in with kind of a programmatic or institutional fix, but have to be based in relationship with human beings. And that gets complex and messy and also doesn't look good on grant applications where you can say, here's the metrics, here's the numbers that we were able to turn over with whatever program we laid out. So I think that there's a challenge there for all of us institutionally and as young people to grapple with those cross pressures and realize that this is just messy relational ground.
So to that point of like what a good Christian looks like or what a good church member looks like, there's this model of someone who's invested financially in their church, who volunteers their time. And I've been on my church's board, and I have listened to these people who are retired and have pensions or in a much different financial situation than a lot of young people, bemoaning the fact that people aren't volunteering as much, people aren't donating as much money or tithing as much to the church. And there has been I felt this huge frustration that there was no other way of envisioning what it meant to be an active member of that community and no understanding of the pressures that a lot of people like in their 20s and 30s feel. And so I wonder if you all have had similar experiences or what you might say or how you might re-envision what it looks like to be active in a church community.
I can just speak on my own experience. In my experience as an organizer and being in the Catholic Church at the same time, a lot of the priests that I would talk to were really managing an institution and didn't have enough time for what they were called to actually do, which really was pastoring. And I learned that, and I talk about this a little bit in the book, but I learned that through building up a sanctuary network in the state of Minnesota when I was living there. And most of the conversations I had, not only with priests, it was every single clergy that I was relating to, was their biggest concern, right, was managing a staff, making sure the lights were on, making sure the building was running, making sure the remodeling was happening. And the time that they were getting to really pastor was not the majority of their time anymore. So I think one of the lessons that I had through that work was there was also a lot of fear in that. The fear of losing a church, the fear of losing more, congregants. Like, it was the biggest thing, I think, keeping them up at night. And I think part of what we're trying to say also with like the youth voices and the book is, what if we envision church in a different way that could be sustained without first thinking of sustaining a building? Now that's hard. I'm not saying that's easy, but I think that a lot of us were trying to say, right, the church is not made up by a building. It's made up by the people within it. And at some point we've been losing that focus. And I think that's part of the problem.
Yeah, it seems like there's this really interesting disconnect where on one hand, there's this sense of urgency, like, oh, we've got to get the young people back. We've got to get the people back. And then this kind of reluctance to listen when the people say what it would take to bring them back. But this kind of leads into the next question I wanted to ask, which is about this conversation that's been going on lately. All of these articles that have come out about young people returning to more traditional forms of religious practice. And in the Catholic setting, that's going to look like people going to more traditional liturgies. Some people are going to the Orthodox Church. People may be turning to more traditional practices, whether worship related or lifestyle related in other denominations. Is that something that you see happening?
Yes and no. Of the people who have come to visit my congregation have mostly been young people, and the people who have left my congregation have mostly been young people. And part of that is what I'm hearing from those who come is they're at a point in their life where they're looking for meaning. They're trying to, they're asking questions. Where do I belong? Who are my people? How do we make sense of everything that's going on in the world? And they're looking for a community that is also grappling with those things, but in a way that is self-aware. I think a lot of the times that when young people I don't know, can we swear on this podcast? They're pretty good BS detectors. I'll say that. Yeah, I guess profanity is a big part of my life.
Go for it.
Yeah, they have a pretty good bullshit detector. And when you go into a community and they're nice, but there's a lack of self-awareness, or that the culture is more projected onto you. How can we get you into our congregation, and less about what is it about me? What is it about our culture that is preventing this demographic from not only visiting us, but staying with us? So I think we, we need to cut the crap and just be more reflective in our own ways. And I think what Catalina was speaking to is a lot of priests, a lot of pastors have been preserving the institution. There's been a preservation of the status quo, the culture as it has been. And there's not so much about a reflection on, okay, what is the culture now? What do we need to change? How are we going to change that? Is it going to be uncomfortable? Absolutely. Okay, how are we going to care for each other in the midst of that discomfort? Because we need to change, we need to evolve. That's how we become better. But our ability to withstand the discomfort, I think, has fallen out our butts, basically, theologically speaking.
I would agree with that, and I think that the recent rise in like traditional liturgy and the media attention that's being focused on that, I don't think is actually separate from a larger trend that we're seeing amongst young people generally, which is a desire for ritual, and that comes out in mindfulness meditation. That comes out in what are your morning pages looking like. There's a lot of different ways that gets highlighted. I think right now the spotlight is on this uptick in Orthodox and Catholic liturgies, also in Episcopalian liturgies, and as in the Lutheran Church, we kind of straddle the line between kind of high liturgy and more modern. There's a drum set in service type spaces. But I think that just speaks to the fact that there's a real hunger for ritual, for things that are going to help be grounding in people's lives. And one of the failures of liturgical communities generally is to explain the liturgy, to help people understand what's happening there. So a lot of the inherited knowledge of liturgy generally in Christian spaces comes from media, and especially media that is kind of making fun at how rote it can feel, how dry it is. You have the lector who's got this really terrible monotone kind of reedy voice in The Simpsons or whatever. But we have an opportunity to help people re-engage with liturgy if we do it responsibly. And one reason that I think that the attention is on Orthodox and Catholic communities is like rite of Christian initiation for adults takes the time to explain the liturgy to people, so that when they come to Mass, they actually know what these motions mean, how they can help guide their spiritual presence and attention in that space. And I think for liturgical traditions that aren't attending to that formation, it just does come across as rote and uninteresting and kind of overblown. So I think that there's, if anything, to be learned from that trend is if you give people the tools to engage with ritual, then they will. And if you don't, then why they won't think that it matters, because the community that's practicing the ritual won't act like it matters either. They'll just act like this is the thing that we do because it's the thing that we do. And that's the important part.
So it seems like there's almost kind of like two separate issues at stake here with this return to tradition, traditional practice, and one of them is what you've just put your finger on, this longing for ritual. And I think something that some think pieces focus on is the search for meaning. And when they talk about that, there's sometimes an assumption that the search for meaning is a search for just an answer, a definition, like, put the coin in the box, the definition comes out, now we know what this is, move on. Does that seem like what young people are actually looking for?
In some ways, I mean, young people are people. And I think all people at times want the easy answer. They want a solution. And I also think that there's a desire for some structure to validate my pre-existing beliefs. So one part of the demographic research around that kind of return to traditional forms of worship, a lot of the people who are involved in that come from very conservative political perspectives, and they're finding kind of validation for their political perspective in these more traditional and kind of performatively traditional, like a Latin mass is right now. That's so counterculture that it feels almost validating to say, like, I'm standing athwart the tide of history yelling stop. And I think that there's also that in progressive spaces as well, where people are looking for ritual to validate their political perspective. And I think part of the reason that we're seeing that in our culture is that we told people for so long in polite company, you don't talk about religion or politics. And the result of that is the only space or only vocabulary for moral clarity or moral identification became like your partisan affiliation. And so now we've gotten to the place where the most important moral quality about a person is the party that they vote for. And I'm not saying that that's irrelevant or unimportant, but it's a really bad place to start a conversation. And if you're looking for cultural scaffolding to hold up your partisan affiliation, especially at a time where we're recognizing the flaws of the partisan system, it makes sense to me that people would be seeking out ritual that feels culturally consistent with that partisan impulse. And in some ways, for me as a pastor, one of my questions is, how do I get people to interrogate that in themselves and ask if this is more about actually engaging with God and engaging with Christ, or is this about validating the group that you're in? And those things should be in friction with each other. Your belonging to an in-group should always be in conflict with your belonging to the full body of Christ.
So when you think about what the church could be, a church that listens to, includes everyone, what might that look like? What might a relevant church institution that reflects Jesus's teachings look like?
I mean, I think going off of what Baird was saying too is our capacity to withstand the uncomfortable and the ambiguous is totally like we lost muscle in that area. And a church that, I mean, faith is all about just, trusting that it'll work out. I think, trust and finding that strength in community, in creation, in love for one another and how we share with each other. So it's a church. What will it look like? It looks like modeling that, naming the discomfort, but not naming the discomfort as a bad thing. Naming it as this is the season that we're in. Naming that time in the world is very final and linear, but time with God is all over the place. Non-existent. Time is fake. But we need to work on strengthening our muscle to endure uncomfortable moments. Especially, if we talk about welcoming young people, if the young people who are coming to our church see us for who we are, they're going to feel it right away. And if they're bold enough, they're going to say it. And that's going to feel uncomfortable. If we can't sit with that discomfort and really grapple with it before reacting to it, then yeah, there's no hope for having young people join us in worship, in our ritual, in service to the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I want to add is I do believe like a lot of the young people I speak with are searching for a spiritual home. And I don't think they even know what that is. I think they know like pieces of it. And ritual is such a big part of it, right? And trying to figure out where that is for them. It's also true. I work with a lot of different denominational pastors across the country. And I was talking to a Latino pastor in Miami. And when we met, he's older than me. And when we met, he automatically said to me, I want you to know, I don't agree with these issues, this issue, this issue. But I do agree with this issue. And I just thought that was really interesting, that's where our conversation first started. But then he also came back in my conversations with him because he's trying to talk to his peers that are white evangelical pastors. And his peers won't even accept to pray for immigrants in their church right now. And this is one issue he deeply cares about. And so I thought that was really interesting because these are his peers that he loves and he cares for. And they love him and they care for him. And the one thought that I thought while I was like trying to figure out how to navigate this reality within like our faith communities, because his story is not unique, is if I had a younger organizer right now in this space, they would refuse to talk to this pastor. They would just refuse to talk to him. And so I think I've been wrestling a lot with, to your question around what does it mean to have a spiritual home and to be able to sit in the discomfort like it's been named right now, but also there are certain things that I don't think we have talked about for decades. And so where do you start? And I don't have the answer to that, but those are the things that I've been wrestling with.
Yeah, I think that both Drew and Catalina, that's spot on. And what I'm experiencing as a pastor, I'm in my first call, so take this with a grain of salt for what it is. But I was preaching at my congregation for about 3 weeks before the 2024 presidential election happened, and getting to know this congregation that's like right on the edge of a bright blue dot in a deep red state. So like straddles both worlds. We've got retired college professors and like crunchy hippie artist types from town, and also just no BS farmers and ranchers from up the river who are listening to like conservative talk radio all day in their work trucks. And trying to preach in that space, I'm realizing how much time I am spending thinking about the other voices that are in their ears. And usually those voices are meme pages on Facebook and really angry political pundits. And I think that a church that is actually doing like ministering to people in the traditional sense of like helping to soothe people's like hurts in the world is slower, and it's quieter, and it's got more space for contemplation than the world provides for us easily. It's interesting that we're having this conversation in Lent, which is the time where ideally we're spending more time in prayer, in these sorts of religious practices that help us to separate from the normal just current of life. And the extra burden of going like working another worship schedule into your week and showing up for an additional service in the middle of your busy schedule while basketball is happening and all of the world is not slowing down for us. The challenge for us as ministers, as church leaders of like both lay and clergy, is to try and provide a real viable alternative to the answers that the world is providing. And I don't think that looks like learning the same lessons from media and from punditry that would make us relevant in that space. This addiction to relevance and sounds more like a media startup than it does like a spiritual community. And I think what's relevant to people is not the same thing as what's going to look good on a shareholder document. And we've learned a lot of wonderful skills about bookkeeping from the business world, but we've also learned some really bad habits about how to think about success, about impact, about what it means to be sustainable and have certainty around that. Institutions love certainty. We want to know what the next quarter is going to look like. And man, the life of faith is lifelong tailing off into eternity. So if our church leaders can't model some degree of comfort with that ambiguity, can't model the ability to say no to these influences that could be useful data, but are not necessarily spirit-driven ways of viewing the world. If we can't say no to those things, how can we expect the people that are coming to us and asking for our help to put their faith in that and to slow down and to be more discerning about the voices that they listen to, and wonder whether their time on Facebook is making them a more compassionate person, whether they're overflowing with the gifts of the Spirit because they just dunked on someone on Twitter. It's not that these spaces are irrelevant or that getting our ideas out there are unimportant, but is it helping us be better followers of Christ, better neighbors to each other, and better lovers of ourselves? Like, if I'm treating myself really poorly, I can't expect to be loving my neighbor terribly well. I don't think my neighbor would want to be loved the way that I'm loving myself necessarily. And if I'm not being careful with that. So that is the space where it is countercultural. We have to show people why we're comfortable with that. And that is really challenging when your paycheck, and in some cases your housing, and in some cases your children's health insurance, are dependent on the comfort level of your congregation following into this countercultural space. And so there's some kind of dual formation that needs to happen there. Pastors, clergy, lay ministers can't be the only ones who are managing their anxiety about this. And also, there's a responsibility of congregation members to think about where their anxiety is coming from, how they're turning that over to Christ. And I think that that's the discipleship piece that is often missing in these conversations about like institutional problems. Often I think that the answer is discipleship and helping people draw closer and learn to trust in God and to trust in love more than they trust in the daily fluctuations of a stock market. That I just can't think of a model of life that's more antithetical to the life of the spirit than panicking about what the stock market is doing. Not because it's not important, but because it's not faithful. It's not spiritual.
So you've all talked about like living into ambiguity and being and sitting in the discomfort of being in community with people who believe differently, think differently. And I was sitting here contrasting this with how a lot of churches kind of handle not just young adult community, but community as a whole, which is like the young adults go in the young adult group and the new parents are going to go in the new parent group. And like we just segment people to make it easy to belong. And we were actually just having a conversation about this at work with the rest of the editors that very few of us have found that a successful way to make community. And that what has been more useful, more helpful, a stronger community is going outside of those like boxes that the church is trying to put us in. And so I guess like we've been talking about how does the church need to listen to young people, but in some way, you know, we need to be part of that creation of the church, right? Like Catalina was saying, like we need to be the one talking to that pastor being in that uncomfortable position. So I guess like what responsibility do we all have to shape our religious communities, even if they don't necessarily like seem like they're offering us what we want in that moment?
Well, I think there's community that's like the Hallmark community, where you bring food to the potluck and you talk about the weather and you have a script that you follow. And then there's community that you enter a space where you are really deeply getting to know one another in an intimate way, and you feel transformed after just a simple, not simple, but after an exchange of words. And I mean, what I have seen is there's a lot of spaces, church spaces, faith communities that we say we're welcoming, but we don't really know one another. And I think that's what the church has been trying to do by, siloing us by age groups. But even in those age groups, we all have scripts that we follow. And it's when we break that open and put, the preschooler and the elders, like that experiment where they put in the senior homes, they bring the preschoolers, and it benefits everyone. So when you break that open, but how you do that is kind of an art form. You can't just say, what's your favorite color? Where were you born? There's this card game called Skin Deep where they ask you more pointed questions, where it gets at more of the meat of who you are as a person. And that's what I mean by we don't know how to know each other. We've forgotten how to be a neighbor. Maybe we're afraid of being known or knowing other people in such a deep, vulnerable way. But that's what we need to do. And I don't know, maybe we could look at Jesus and see that he went to the people, he went to the places that weren't where we were supposed to be going, and he sat with them and just listened to their story. Those are also skills that some people are naturally good at and some people are not good at. And so how do we coach one another? How do we mentor one another in listening deeply, active listening? And what are we listening for? We're listening for not just what's being said, but what's beneath the surface. And getting to the meat, getting to the middle, the core of who we are as people, so that we can actually be transformed. That's what we are as a community, is we're transforming ourselves, or transforming each other just by getting to know one another.
So what does it look like for a community to be transformed? And I think I thought it was funny when one of you said something about, the church may say, we're welcoming. Whenever I hear someone say, oh yes, we're welcoming, I'm like already on guard. Like, sounds like maybe they're not going to be welcoming if they have to make the claim. But what does that really look like? That real welcoming and real transformation beyond just checking a few boxes.
Yeah, it's like when someone says, I'm so self-aware, where you're just like that automatically. I don't think that's true. I'm with you, Rebecca. And I know a lot of people who have that same reaction, especially folks who come from communities that have traditionally not been welcomed in the church, whether that's LGBTQ folks or like single moms, people who have known the experience or have like been trained to expect the experience of showing up to a community that says all are welcome, but you're welcome to like this mold, and we're going to cram you in there. We've got a mold for you ready and waiting for you, and that's where we're going to send you. I think transformed community doesn't happen without trust, kind of what Drew was alluding to. It doesn't happen without being fully known. And there's a consumerism in American Christianity that says the purpose of this community is to soothe my woes and make me feel comfortable. And as soon as it stops feeling that way, then I will go and find someplace else, which I think is missing the point of spiritual community generally. And it ties into this American assumption that the goal of Christianity is to save my soul. And if other souls come along with me in the process, and that's gravy. But my priority and my individualist kind of sentiment has to be focused on me and my salvation. But church isn't for me; it's for us, and I'm a part of us. But the way that people treat it as a space where, as soon as we sing songs that I don't like, or we have children in the back and they're being noisy, which heaven forbid there should be kids in the church who have feelings while church is going on. The response of that saying like, this didn't cater to me exactly, and so I need to go. And not in the same way of this isn't a safe place for me, but in the way of, gosh, I was annoyed, or I was bored, I was frustrated at times. Like, we should not underrate the transformative power of boredom. And for me, some of the most liberating relationships in my life are the ones where I'm allowed to just be bored with other people, where I don't have to be entertaining people, and we can just share space together. And we would prefer to be bored together than, I don't know, distracted apart. And those parts of community that are really transformative, where it's in shared work, it's in play, it's in boredom, not just in entertainment. Have I captured your attention and given you enough stimulation for this hour or whatever? There's just a lot of our culture that we have to be pushing against to help people receive these gifts. But I don't think that people don't want these gifts. I just don't think that they know how to receive them. It's like we've laid this banquet table, but haven't put out the silverware, and we think that no one's eating because they're not hungry. And I think that that's the wrong impulse to follow. I don't think that that's true.
Before we wrap up, I wanted to ask each of you to go around and say, like, if you had one takeaway message that you want the church broadly to hear from this conversation, what would that be?
I think for me, it would be, and in particular to young people too, in this conversation, is if our first instinct is to correct, then we're already starting in the wrong. You know, I've experienced so much in church, young people being corrected first, and the church starts feeling like another place where they're there to only do what is, the rules or follow, instead of show up as their full selves and then feel the spirit.
I think I would say do the work as much as possible to know yourself first. One of the best lessons I learned there in pastor world, there's a thing called clinical pastoral education where you can do it for continuing education or if you want to become a chaplain. But the core of that work is asking yourself, why did I respond that way? What story, what memory is coming to the surface when I'm encountering this person, when this person is speaking to me this way, when this person is presenting in such a way? I'm feeling something. Is it about them or is it about something that happened to me or around me in my history that's causing me to act this way, to respond this way? I think when we know ourselves first, we become more compassionate and more curious about other people because we realize much of our reactions aren't about them. They're actually our stuff that we're projecting onto them. So do that work. Ask yourself, why am I this way? In short, therapy is a good start. Explore that as an option, but really just start asking yourself, why am I this way? And do it in community. Do it with people who are willing to be honest with you and honest about you, so that you can grow and become better and in better relationship with others.
I love both of those answers. I think the one thing that I want to have the church broadly reflect on is the knowledge that the gospel is not going to make us powerful. The gospel is not, if we're truly following the gospel, then we are not going to be the pillar of society in the way that we would want to be. It's not going to make life more convenient for us. And it is often going to put us at odds with the inherited knowledge of the world. And we have to be ready for that. In the United States, the church got really used to being the default setting for respectable company in the world. Like, you go to church in order to maintain your standing at the country club or in the union or wherever it was. It was a social technology more than anything else. And if we're really following the gospel, we have to be ready to become less relevant to the world and more relevant to our neighbors. And that is a trade-off that the church doesn't want to do. It's a trade-off that we don't want to make. But that's the call of Christ in this space. We have to really think about what it means to be following Christ, which means that to be a good Christ follower is going to at times make us bad patriots. It's going to make us bad Democrats and Republicans. It's going to make us really inconvenient to those in power. And that has to be something that we accept, because I don't think if the ways of this world were going to save it, they would have done it by now, right? If power and wealth and might and status were going to save the world, they would have. And they haven't. And they won't, because they can't. And so the church needs to be able to believe more powerfully in the love of Christ and the belovedness of all of creation than it believes in its standing as a 501c3 or as able to finance an advocacy office in DC, which are useful and good and important things. But are they the first thing? Are they the most important thing about us? Or is the most important thing that God loves this world and we are called to love it, despite how hard that is at times? We just got to be ready for that question. And when that question costs us, if it costs us anything less than crucifixion, we could consider ourselves pretty lucky. We got off pretty easy. If our burden is now we have to pay taxes on our property, oh no, what a what a travesty to have happened to the church compared to what's happened to Christ and to Christ's people, the people who are being crucified every day and re-crucified, the image of God who are suffering and God with them. So what are we willing to lose in order to truly live out this love? And I say that as a guy who has to balance the budget at his congregation and knows, like, I have to send my sin and tithe, all these things. Like, I know the institutional pressure and I feel responsibility to that as well. But those questions are relevant. And if those aren't questions that are being asked in the room, then we're not doing gospel work. Then we're doing nonprofit administration, which is good and useful work, but it's not the gospel.
Those were all really great answers that, and each one of you, while you were speaking, I was thinking of applying them to myself. So thank you.
Thanks, y'all, for having us.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on.
Emily, was there anything that surprised you in this conversation?
I don't know if I'd use the word surprised. I think it was a really good conversation. I'm glad we had it. It was really good to speak to other people from a variety of backgrounds who were kind of going through the same thing that I'd been going through at various times in my life. It made me feel validated. I really liked when we talked about kind of the phenomenon you mentioned in the introduction, which is a lot of media attention right now on young people returning or turning to the Catholic Church, to kind of traditional liturgies. And that this kind of speaks to this like broader hunger for ritual, for meaning, that was also showing up in other ways. It's not just that people are turning to the Catholic Church, people are also turning to mindfulness apps, meditation practices, and that there's this danger that people will find a new religious practice, a new religious faith, because they think that it's exotic or appealing or countercultural, but they don't really understand it and they don't really understand what it means. And that is really on the community to, sure, use liturgy to draw people in, but also then to kind of deepen, like do faith formation alongside of that. And I appreciated that our CIA was held up as a model of how to do this well. And I agree. And I also then sometimes feel like our CIA is becoming less and less important or being done less and less well. But I did want to like pull that up, that was like something that came across as like, oh, the Catholics are doing it really great.
Yeah, one doesn't often hear that the Catholics are the ones doing it great when it comes to anything having to do with welcoming people into a parish. So, 2 cheers for us there. I really appreciated that they were honest about the fact that a lot of church leaders aren't listening, because I feel like there's a real divide where on one hand, you have these people who are like, yeah, the church leaders are listening. We have cool priests. We have hip leaders. What are you complaining about? The church is a great place to be. And then there's the other people who are like, no one's listened to me and I'm done. I'm out. And to have the people who are doing the work and engaging and staying also admitting that young people feel unheard, that was very validating to me, even though I'm not a young person anymore.
Yeah, I think what the news coverage is missing is that belonging to a religion, especially a religion like Catholicism, takes work, and it is a choice. It is a choice to believe and to belong every day. And it's not glamorous. It's not like the shiny dating pool that the New York Times just covered. And I really appreciated that we got to talk about that it's not easy all the time. I think it was Baird who said, like, if it cost us anything less than crucifixion, then we got off pretty easy or something.
Right?
Yeah, so given all that, was there anything that you wish we talked about more?
I was really interested in this idea that people are seeking ritual. And I think it's not that I felt like I was missing information, but I just would have loved to have had a conversation about why that is. And like ritual just seems to be so important to human life, and it relates to the cycle of the seasons and the rhythms of nature, the rhythms of human life. And I would love to kind of dive into why it is that we're looking for that. How about you?
Yeah, I wish that So all three of the people we talked to, right, work for the church. They have stakes in the church, right? Catalina is a community organizer. The other two are ministers, like clergy. So they're people who are deeply invested in the church and also in this project of like working with people of a variety of generations. And I wish that we had gotten to speak to someone else who like wasn't a trained minister in whatever that looked like, because I think there were times when I really wanted to get kind of more into like the details, like when I asked what responsibility do we have to kind of shape the church that doesn't offer what we need. They all gave good answers, but they were kind of general, and I wish like someone had said, yeah, I struggled with this too, and this is where I kind of ended up. And I don't think you're necessarily going to get that from someone who is the minister of a church.
I think that's a good point, Emily. I think that it might actually be interesting. I mentioned, that there are the people who leave the church. I wonder if, to some extent, if you're working in the church, if you have a ministry position in the church, then perhaps you had enough of a good experience to not want to leave. And so where are the voices of those who left because they didn't have a good enough experience? There was no place for them. They were told no room in the inn and moved on.
Yeah. That also reminds me of something else that kind of we circled around, which is the kind of financial stability aspect. And this maybe is not as directly applicable within the Catholic context. We don't have pastors who have families they have to support. But I do think it says something about people who gets to be in ministry in general, lay ministry, who works for the church, that there's this tension between working to build the church that we believe in and also needing to pay our mortgage and our kids' health insurance. There's kind of this structural incentivization to not push, to not take risks, because you need that paycheck.
Now, isn't that a dynamic that we're seeing across different institutions right now? It's like, if you want to have a foothold, you can't be the one who rocks the boat. And maybe it's always been the case. This perhaps takes us back to the importance of what the church is here for at all, which should be to liberate, not to bind. On which note, Emily, what would your sermon be?
There was this line about, we've laid the table, but we haven't put out the silverware. And we think no one's eating because we're not hungry, but it's really we have no silverware. And I think that there's something to say about the gifts that people are bringing to the church versus the gifts that the church thinks it wants. And that the people perhaps like haven't been given the right tools to fully like access what the church can offer. I think it's like it connects to maybe like Jesus feeding people, feeding the 5,000, right? Like there's something there. It's not well thought out yet, but there's something there about like creating a culture of plenty and giving people all the resources they need to create that community that is the body of Christ.
Yeah, I see that. When you mention the feeding of the 5,000, that comes home. I think I would want to preach a little bit more towards the people who are in leadership positions in the church and remind them of what the gospel message is. And when Jesus said to go and make disciples of all nations, what the disciple does is follow Jesus. And following Jesus means following Jesus to the cross, but it also means following Jesus in terms of going to the margins, serving the most vulnerable, challenging injustice. And that was what Jesus emphasized in his earthly ministry, not gathering in a building. He didn't even have a building. I mean, unless you want to talk about the upper room where they were hiding out. And so I think that what you said earlier about the metrics in church engagement, we really need to think about that. Are we doing what Jesus told us to do as a church?
And that's our show. Thanks again for joining us for Glad You Asked. If you enjoyed the episode, please tell your friends about the podcast, or leave a review or rating on whatever podcast platform you listen to. It helps more people find our show.
Do you have a question you'd like to hear answered on our show? Email us at editors@uscatholic.org. And please join us next week when we talk about why we pray.
Glad You Asked is a project of U.S. Catholic Magazine, which is published by the USA Canada province of the Claretian Missionaries. This summer, we're offering a special subscription offer for our Glad You Asked listeners. Subscribe or renew your print subscription for 1 year, and we'll give you a free gift subscription to share with a friend. Visit uscatholic.org/gift to learn more, because great conversations and great Catholic journalism are meant to be shared.
Glad You Asked is hosted by me, Rebecca Bratton-Weiss, along with Emily Santa. We are produced by Stephanie Clary, with sound engineering by Nathaniel Hunter and art by Megan Avery.